Right, and welcome to the Executive Member for Transport decision session on March the 14th, 2023. The first item I have on the agenda is declarations of interest. I have none other than perhaps to note that some of the decisions we're talking about have got a history which are in the report where I've made a decision such as item 6. There was a decision back in May last year. Item 2 is exclusion of press and public. With reference to item 5, as set out in the agenda, there is confidential information in annexes A, D and E, and on the grounds they contain information relating to individuals, the consideration of that element of the report will be in closed session, which means I have to determine at this point the exclusion of press and public for consideration of that element of that item. So I'm proposing that will be part of the process. So when we get to that item, I'll obviously ask any members of press and public and the live stream to be switched off while we consider that item. But I hope to take the majority of the discussion in public session. And that item will actually, just so the record, we'll probably explain it when we get to it, but will be in consultation with the Executive Member for Housing for reasons explained in the report. So I now move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of February, and I'm happy to approve those as a record of the meeting. Okay. So that then moves on to public speakers, and I think it's a credit to say the interest in democracy, the number of people that we have registered to speak today on transport is always a topical issue. So I very much welcome the level of interest and the public speakers who have 3 minutes each to address the meeting and put their views before we move on to consider those items. So some of the speakers are on remote access, dialing in, and some are in the room. So it will be a mixture of the two. So the first item I have, first speaker I have is Councillor Waters, who will be speaking on item 5. So is Councillor Waters there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, thank you. So if you'd like to make the points you want to make in 3 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. How very apt that this petition makes its way to this particular executive member session, given the way this setup deals with, for example, parking problems by simply moving them along the highway. Very apt indeed. Why do I say that? Because this illegal eyesore encampment on a major road into York was created by the council housing function, because they evicted these people from the Oswaldwick site 4 years ago. What did they expect to happen? Were these people supposed to disappear into thin air? I totally reject the bluff in this report that council officers use to avoid having to take action. In paragraph 15, much is made of the consideration of the human rights of the occupiers and how they cannot be removed. And yet, they were removed from an official site. It's a ludicrous argument, further undermined by direction to leave notices issued by this council against other, some similar, much shorter established encampments, and of course the powers available to the police if requested by the council as landowners. There's talk, and that's all it is, talk of interim and long-term solutions to this matter. You've had 4 years to solve this, and this council have done nothing other than spend 12 grand a year on water supplies, £1,400 a year on a site toilet, and it's anybody's guess what the regular rubbish clearance costs are, all to encourage and facilitate this encampment. Why is the establishment of a caravan park, scrapyard and waste transfer station permitted by this council on the public highway with, according to this report, no intention of removal in any reasonable time frame. I'll tell you why, because it's out of sight and mind of the very housing officers who have created this situation. In paragraph 5, the head of community safety has corresponded on this matter and has attended local parish council meetings. The housing function routinely ignore all correspondence, and the corporate director has refused a number of requests to attend parish council meetings. To try and bluff again on this matter by equating a solution to the local plan process is yet more disingenuous nonsense. I put a submission into the local plan only last week, in consultation, I might add, with the Travellers Trust, that highlights this council misleading the local plan inspectors on future pitch provision on existing sites.
30 seconds.
However, I'm glad you have highlighted in paragraph 24 my proposal for this layby, but rest assured, if, and I think it's a very big if, this site is ever cleared, the local community and me won't be waiting for you lot and a stopping up order. Tarmac will be ripped up, it'll be soiled up and planted to prevent situations like this in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We'll consider when we come to that item. Next speaker I have is Gwen Swinburne in person on governance issues. Morning, Gwen, when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're good to go. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I think you should call a halt to these various scattergun requests for LTNs and residence parking zones. I suspect you might think that what you are doing is responsive and good democracy, but it is a long way from that. It is so unfair and simply favours those with sharp elbows or those with active ward councillors. The whole process is out of control. The senior management should have called a halt to this chaos, especially this latest proposal to take each application in turn, forget any minimal process, baseline criteria, or prioritisation based on needs. This needs to stop until a proper strategy, policy and implementation framework is agreed on, particularly LTNs, but also Resparks. This must include proper consultation protocols, particularly in the non-parished wards. It must be clear that consultations, particularly for LTNs, but also Resparks, are far too restricted at the moment, almost entirely focused on only the beneficiaries who are demanding the LTNs or Resparks. Can you get that door, please? Sorry. Management should not have allowed this to go so far without a framework in place. The fact that there is no strategy, process, or even call for applications disadvantages most of the city who do not know of the system. Please stop this and direct management to design a proper strategy and plan. This should be done as part of the transport strategy, which is of course now 4 years late. Finally, Chair, I've been banging on about the dangerous changes made to favour only cyclists at the roundabout at the end of Monkgate, a school run for 2 primary schools. The staff first removed the metal safety railings and then shockingly added 2-way cycle traffic on the narrow inclined hairpin footway. I note at the other end of Monkgate, at Monk Bar, traffic planners have put thousands of students at risk by not adding a Touchon crossing across Monkgate, the main route to York St John from the new accommodation blocks. May I see now a formal assurance that a full risk and safety assessment is undertaken for the pedestrians before a fatality occurs, recognising that pedestrians are supposed to be at the top of the transport hierarchy, not at the bottom, as seen here.
Thank you very much for your comments, which we'll consider.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So the next speaker I have is Councillor Smalley in relation to item 9, which is the local cycling walking infrastructure plan on remote. Councillor Smalley, are you there?
I am. Hopefully you can hear me, Chair.
Thank you. Start when you're ready.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I'll speak very briefly just to welcome the report, the work that's gone into it, and to thank the officers for the opportunity that ward councillors, parish councillors and others have had to feed into the work. I think my main point really this morning is just to ensure that in the production of all this work and the future LC whip, that those schemes that are within the emergency active travel programme and the active travel programme aren't, I guess, sort of sat at the periphery. Now, I understand that within this paper, sensibly, there's been a sort of work done to avoid duplication, and that makes complete sense in terms of the prioritised 10 lists to go forward to design. But I think within this whole work and within future consultation, it'd be good to note the work that's happening outside of this within the active travel programme. And then it was just to make the point, I guess, locally across Rawcliffe and Clifton Without, I guess figure 35 in terms of the Strava cycling heat map. And I understand that this is more recreation, but shows very clearly that Shipton Road, the whole length of Shipton Road between the A1237 and Bootham, in terms of the A19, is popular and well used and is white in terms of the heat map. And yeah, purely because it's not a cycle route, doesn't even feature within figure 15 in terms of the cycle route user ratings, speaking specifically about the stretch of the A19 between the allotments and the junction of Rawcliffe Lane. And my point therefore, Chair, is just how important it is that part 2 of the active travel scheme along Shipton Road is sort of consulted upon and sort of pushed forward as soon as possible. And I welcome the route on part 1, the work that's been done on part 1 as well. Within that, and just to sort of note that I think that the heat map does quite clearly demonstrate the need for improvements across Rawcliffe, Clifton Without, in particular Clifton Moorgate, Water Lane, and Rawcliffe Lane as well. But just to thank the work that's gone into it and welcome future consultation.
Thank you very much for your comments, which we consider when we come to that item. The next speaker I have on item 9 is Kate Revillius. Just to clarify, is it Kate Revillius or Kate Revillius Cycle Campaigns? Okay, okay, thank you. Because I have had written representation from the cycle campaign as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to congratulate Sistra team and all the other people who've been involved in producing this draft LC Whip evaluation report under such a tight timescale. I'm impressed by the thorough approach that's been taken. And this LC Whip, along with a local transport plan, are vital tools for transport planning. So it's a shame it didn't appear early in the administration, but I really welcome this report now. It's really interesting to see the route prioritisation and the scoring system, and this provides a clear evidence-based lead as to where active travel funding needs to be channelled in order to bring the greatest benefits and to reverse the big decline that we've seen in cycling in recent years. I'm asking the executive member now to use this draft route prioritisation to inform which active travel schemes are taken forward from now on. So some of these schemes will require significant sums of money to bring them up to the LTM 120 standards, but this shouldn't be used as an excuse to defer schemes, as has happened with the government-funded active travel schemes. Instead, an argument can be made to tackle key sections of a scheme, such as installing infrastructure at a dangerous junction or creating a crossing point at a strategic location, with a clear stated intention to bid for funding to complete the remainder of the scheme as soon as possible. I also ask that the executive member requests officers update the timetable for the government-funded active travel schemes in light of this draft active LC Whip report, so as to understand which of those schemes should be prioritised and tackled first, given that funding won't permit for all the schemes to progress simultaneously. It would also be appreciated if an update can be given on how much of the 1.2 million of government active travel funding remains, and for officers to ask Active Travel England if the remaining funding can be pooled in order to make progress on at least one scheme, or used to tackle the highest priority areas with urgency, rather than continue to wait for uncertain grant awards in order to complete an entire scheme in one go. One last note, I see that the Copmanthorpe to Bishopthorpe route is identified in the LC Whip as an opportunity for an active travel route, and I ask that this is taken into consideration with regard to your decision on the Network Rail crossing. And just to finish off by saying how pleased I am that we have an LC whip underway. And I hope that it'll enable us to improve our active travel score next year. And I'm looking forward to seeing the completed LC whip. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Certainly one of those items I think may be on the agenda next week. So the next speaker I have is Carol Green, who is in the room, I believe, is going to speak on the Copmanthorpe crossing.
Thank you, Councillor. I do not blame Network Rail for choosing the simplest and cheapest option. That's what businesses that are not nationalised do. They don't have to consider what's best overall for the greater benefit or for the long term. But this crossing that they replace is part of the Eba Way, which is a 70-mile route from Helmsley to Ilkley. And this route traditionally joined the two villages of Bishopthorpe and Copmanthorpe. And that's why the road that leads up to it in Bishopthorpe is called Copmanthorpe Lane. Network Rail have heard our arguments that an 88-step bridge discriminates against not only disabled people, but they argue that the route from Bishopthorpe is so difficult for wheelchairs and disability scooters that they don't need to take this into consideration. Seriously? In this day and age? Don't think so. But Jamie Wood, who's a wheelchair user with MS, has negotiated the route from the crossing to the end of Copmanthorpe Lane in Bishopthorpe in order to disprove these arguments. I've taken my bike along the route, and it is difficult as you approach the crossing, but it could easily be improved. And because they're arguing that the bridge is in a different place, all of this becomes immaterial. As they're moving it further down the line, we haven't been told of any negotiations with landowners, but obviously the route changes and could be much easier for anybody with any form of wheels, disabled or whatever. They've not mentioned how that route will change from the end of Copmanthorpe Lane to their new position for the bridge. But it's not only disabled people who will no longer be able to use this route. Every family with small children in a push-chair or buggy, every cyclist using the route, and keen long-distance cyclists use it, or children in family groups will not manage an 88-step bridge. It would drastically reduce the use of the Eba Way, I feel sure. And at a time when we're all conscious that we're encouraging people to walk and cycle, it will actually put people into cars to get from one village to the other, because they won't be able to use this route anymore. I'm pleased that Network Rail wants to keep people safe and stop the use of the crossing. That bit's fine. And I realise this gives them a problem to solve, but we cannot allow it to be solved at this cost to local people and the National Leisure Route.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We'll consider that when we come to our item. The next speaker I have is again remote. I believe it's Jill Shaw online regarding the item 5. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you. If you'd like to address the meeting, you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, Jill Shaw, Chairman of Dunnington Parish Council. On Sunday, the 12th of March, an article regarding Noddle Hill layby was published on yorkmix.com. It talked about a long-term solution being proposed following a petition to remove the travellers' camp from the layby on the A166, which had been there since June 2019. In response to the petition, an unnamed officer is reported to have said that the layby was not created to meet a highway's need. I beg to differ. It was and still is in part a layby. There is a P sign on the York-bound side of the A166. Before the travellers arrived, commercial vehicles did use that area as a layby. The officer then went on to say the removal of the unauthorised encampment cannot go ahead without consideration of the individuals camped there. It seems strange that you did not think of the individuals' human rights when you evicted them from the Osborne site and made them homeless. The officer then goes on to say that the council will continue to provide support to the family in situ. How long is this for? It states that there will be 44 authorised gypsy traveller pitches in the new local plan. In other words, it will be for another couple of years. The new local plan has got to be adopted, a location found and planning permission obtained. I understand from council employees that there is a pitch vacant on Osbaldwick site. Why are they not being accommodated there? If they refuse, then they have made themselves homeless. Excuse me, just turn the page. The encampment is an eyesore. Dunnington residents have said that they feel intimidated when using the Noddle Hill public right-of-way. When travellers moved onto a field close to the Millennium Bridge in September 2022, direction to leave orders were served by the Neighbourhood enforcement team. The council did not concern itself with their human rights and making them homeless. One of our councillors paid a visit to the travellers and asked if they wanted to be moved from the layby. Their response was yes, as it is rat infested. By virtue of the City of York not having taken action against the travellers over the last 4 years, the lack of action amounts to permission, therefore making an unlawful encampment a lawful encampment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll consider that when we come to that item. The next speaker I have is Councillor Doughty on the cycle and walking infrastructure plan.
Good morning, Chair and officers. Thank you. You will know that I don't support some of the anti-motorist and unpopular decisions this council administration has been making, not least with the Blue Badge city centre parking for the disabled restrictions. I prefer to offer the ability for residents to make a choice in how they get about the city and give encouragement by improving the choices, not taking them away. You may have heard I've been collecting petition signatures for an off-road cycle path to link Strensall to Huntington via Earswick, and will be presenting the hundreds of signatures collected from residents at full council next week. I've been making this cycle path suggestion for a good few years, and I was therefore pleased to see a reference to a cycle path for Strensall listed amongst the 10 locations being considered for investigation. There are a couple of points I wanted to share. Firstly, the obvious one is that a great number of pupils who attend Huntington Secondary School live in Strensall and Earswick. In a rough count, there are around half a dozen buses ferrying students to and from school from my ward. Bus contracts are in place, no doubt at a considerable long-term cost, and obviously not to mention also the residents who take their children by car. In no small part due to the very dangerous Strensall Road, which means many parents would not feel comfortable, understandably, allowing their children to cycle along this busy, long stretch for fear of a serious accident or worse. For the same reason, a white line painted to the side of the carriageway is not a safe option either. Having relatives in the Netherlands, I'm no stranger to the benefits of good cycling infrastructure, and I'm very much an advocate. An off-road cycle path, which would be utilised by young people, can help with the long-term positive culture direction needed. And what better way to give encouragement for less dependency on vehicles, not to mention the obvious health benefits. I'm convinced a cycle path of this location would be instantly popular, and demand is certainly there, judging by the enthusiasm I've come across in collecting the petition signatures. There is reference to costs for studies and feasibility as part of early investigations for the council plan. The second point I raise, therefore, is that officers should be able to refer to a feasibility study paid for with some ward funding around 2009-10, prior to me becoming a councillor. This was carried out by Sustrans and may offer current officers a picture as a basis rather than starting again from scratch and possibly repeating some work already undertaken. I highlight this as I expect there will have been some officer changes in the time lapsed. A final point I make relates to another separate but possible future avenue for funding. I referred to Strensall Barracks at the local plan working group recently, and have previously spoken to officers about the need for future plans for the previously developed land on this site when the army leave. And the Defence Infrastructure Organisation indicate they still do plan to leave, which could be as early as next year. With the introduction of possible community infrastructure levies for development, this might help provide a funding stream and/or alongside future pitches for active travel funding to government or organisers such as Sustrans. I hope that whoever runs the council beyond May, we can all work together cross-party to make schemes like this become a reality for the benefit of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure you'd be very welcome to the working groups about the transport strategy which we're developing for the city. Thank you. So the next speaker I have is Councillor Melly, also on item 9, who's on remote, is she?
Yeah, hi, good morning.
Yeah, when you're ready.
Thanks. I'd just like to say a few words about agenda item 9, progress on the local walking and cycling infrastructure plan. I've got lots to say about the specific details of the plan, but I'll save that for the working group, which I am a member of. But this agenda item is about progress on developing the plan, so I'll comment on that specifically. York has needed a proper plan for walking and cycling routes for a long time, but the Executive Member for Transport has dithered and delayed and failed to deliver. The excuse given in the report that it is being done now, 5 years overdue, doesn't stack up because it's common for local authorities to review their LC whip after 2 years anyway. So now a local LC whip is being rushed through without being done properly because an election is coming up, and it's too little too late. This council administration has failed to deliver on the council's active travel programme of walking and cycling infrastructure schemes, despite government funding to do so. Active Travel England has downgraded City of York Council, jeopardising future funding. Cycling rates have plummeted under this leadership, and people who walk or cycle on our streets have been abandoned to substandard, unsafe infrastructure. It's important that this big piece of work is done properly. The council needs a proper plan on how to improve walking and cycling infrastructure in order to improve air quality and allow people to get to work, school and services safely. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll consider that when we come to our item. Next speaker I have is Councillor Orrell on item 7. Is Councillor Orrell in the room? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in relation to the LTE plans on agenda item 7. Last year, the old village in Huntington was closed to traffic for a number of weeks because of a sinkhole at the south end of the village. A number of residents contacted us saying how much better and safer it was when the road was closed to traffic, asking if there could be a permanent closure. Believing it was important to consult residents for their views, we therefore asked the people of the old village if they wanted a more permanent form of closure. At that time, the majority of residents wanted some form of road closure, but with varying views as to how this could be achieved. We were advised by council officers that the best way of moving this forward was to collect a petition which will allow the consultation to take place that is being considered today. The immediate safety issue is to make the sharp bend at the north end of the old village safer in order to minimise the anxiety of nearby residents. Prior to the sinkhole closure, there was an incident when the wall in front of a house on this bend was damaged. We then asked for a road safety review. The normal speed review took place, which unsurprisingly showed that average speed in the old village were within normal visits. I say unsurprisingly because the majority of the people who use the road are local residents who are well aware of the road condition and the need for care. Residents report that it is the minority of vehicles that drive through the village that speed, including the increase in home delivery vehicles following the pandemic. And then last December, there was a further accident where the walls of 2 properties were demolished with material going through windows. Residents in this area of the old village are understandably concerned for their own safety, even when in their own homes. Following discussions with officers, some measures of signage and road markings will be put in place. We would urge that this is done as soon as possible. These measures will be augmented when local residents have been consulted on further measures. Ward councillors welcome the proposed consultation to determine what further measures the people of the old village think are needed to make the roads safer for all residents of the old village, and particularly to give peace of mind to the residents living near the sharp bend. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll consider that when we come to that item. That concludes the public speakers on my list. So I will now move on to the next item, item 5, and how I propose to take this. As I said, Councillor Crackhill will join me for this item. It's being my decision in consultation with the Executive Member for Housing. And if Neil, do you want to lead off and introduce this item? I will, after we've had some introduction, I will adjourn for the private element part of this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Councillor de Gon. I'll pass to Tracy in a second. Just to make it clear in respect to one of the comments from the speakers about the law increase in intending to make this encampment lawful. The purpose of today's decision is effectively to give a clear decision from the authority of the future intended use of the land and removing vehicular access from that land in the future by effectively starting the stopping up order. So just wanted to address that issue and also to highlight why this session is in front of yourself as Transport Officer, and I'll pass to Tracy to work through the detail.
Thank you very much. It's unusual for me to be attending one of your transport sessions, decision-making sessions. But as Neil has pointed out, this is a complex set of issues that relate to the background and the future of the unauthorised encampment at the Noddle Hill layby. The elements of the decisions in the report that relate to the particular circumstances of the family cannot be discussed in public. They are complex. There are multiple legal perspectives to be taken into account, and hence the duration of the work that we've been undertaking to try and resolve this. This is definitely not something that officers have been ignoring or kicking into the long grass. It's complicated to resolve, and you see before you today a response to the petition and some specific recommendations. The first 2, 3 and 4 we will discuss when we're in private session, because they relate to the particular circumstances and the housing needs of those individuals. The final recommendation is to, and I have transport colleagues here if you want any detailed conversations about how long this has been a lay-by and what the process is for stopping up order. But the recommendation would be, when the housing issue has been resolved, to commence the process to stop up Noddle Hill lay-by as being surplus to the requirements of the highway, and develops proposals for a green area to improve the amenity of the adjoining area. If you've got any specific questions about the highways, I'll try and address those, or invite Len to comment on those.
It would be worth clarifying in my agenda pack, just clarify the plan. Is that's in the public domain, isn't it?
It is, yes.
The actual on page 25. It might be helpful just to explain the different ownerships and in relation to the position of the encampment, because obviously that is one of the elements of the legal advice and the process, the highways process, isn't it? I just want to clarify that the existence of how this stretch of road came into be in existence, and whether or not it's adopted highway.
Certainly, yes. So when the
Is that Helen?
My name is Helen Berger. I'm the Traffic and Highway Development Manager for City of York Council. The lay-by was the old alignment of the road, and obviously when that was straightened somewhat, it remained as adopted highway, but the ownership of the land is not clear, it's unregistered. That's quite common with really old roads, because obviously there were highways and nobody really needed to register the land. But if we were to stop up, then we need to make the land ownership clear somehow. So this is work we'll be doing with the legal team.
So just to clarify, what is the actual process? Maybe that's one for the legal team, is in terms of determining the land, because I'm aware that the computerized land registry is a relatively new phenomenon, and prior to that there was sort of paper records somewhere in some dusty basement cellar somewhere.
The usual process would be to gather any evidence together of what the ownership might be. Like you say, probably in some dusty safe somewhere, with various different deeds and land transfers that might have been in process. Excuse me. Unregistered land is getting to be a less common thing there, as things get registered over time due to circumstances like this.
So
I think your recommendation 5, Councillor de Gaunt, is reflects the uncertainty in the land ownership and effectively gives delegation to officers to establish for certain the legal position, so that when the stopping order is brought into effect, there is clarity of land ownership brought to that land, and thereby decisions that are proposed to go forward to executive in the future can be made with confidence about the land ownership arrangements. And clearly, as has been alluded to by officers, the land in question under the highway itself is probably a highway 16th, 17th century, when nobody had even dreamt about what a computer might look like, let alone starting to register land on it. So whilst it may be in a dusty cupboard somewhere, it may not, and therefore, again, the recommendation 5 gives us the opportunity to work with our legal team to establish certainty so future decisions can be made. But clearly today what you're doing is starting that process. And as I said at the head of the item, what we're trying to establish here from the perspective of yourself as being responsible for the authority's highway infrastructure, that actually the intent is that vehicular access to this area will no longer be permitted post implementation, and therefore that should mitigate against this becoming a recurring problem in the future, which was one of the concerns and questions from the members of the public.
And just to reflect that one of the speakers did refer to the history of the highway use in that site. The stopping up order process involves a consultation process that would draw out the relative needs of highway users versus local communities.
I see. So as you say, there would be a consultation process that would provide the opportunity for anybody who consider that an important element of their business or whatever to be able to respond to that. Okay, so is there anything else that people want to say in the public session before I move to the private session? The reason I'm obviously it's my decision whether or not we go into private session. But I do feel I just want to make sure, although, obviously I've got the benefit of reading the report to make sure that is properly considered in conversation with officers before making a decision. So at this point, I'll ask if we can discontinue the live stream for probably about 5 or so minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. And if the public who are in attendance, if you'd like to wait, there is a waiting area outside of the room at the end of the corridor that you can wait if you want to hear later items on the agenda. I appreciate you give me a bit of exercise while we get ourselves through this item. Okay. Welcome back to Executive Member for Transport decision session in consultation with Executive Member for Housing, Councillor Craghill. I just had a private conversation relating to the confidential papers. I'm just going to invite Councillor Craghill if she wishes to say something to the in response.
Thank you. Just very briefly, and following the further discussion we've had, I just want to recognise that I understand some residents in the area have expressed some concerns, and appreciate the tree planting work that was done at an earlier point in time by local residents. I'd like to welcome the actions that have been taken in recent years, including throughout COVID, by various officers across the council to support individuals in the encampment and to respond to any local concerns that have been raised, and work with the Travellers Trust as well. I'd like to particularly welcome the legal recognition in the paper at paragraphs 15 and 16 of the complexity of this situation and the requirement to consider the council's duty to prevent homelessness, its social care duties and human rights and equalities legislation as key components in this decision. And matters in the confidential annex add weight to that balance of decision making. I also want to welcome the intention to increase the number of gypsy and traveller pitches in York via new sites through the local plan process, and welcome the establishment of a project manager post, which is one of the recommendations in this paper, to commence planning for the provision of additional pitches in York. And bearing all that in mind, I want to welcome the key recommendation here today, to recommend the Executive Member for Transport and support that recommendation to commence the process to stop up the Noddle Hill layby as the most practicable and reasonable way forwards in what is a very complex situation. So,
thank you. I don't know if you want to add.
Thank you, Chair. I think it falls to yourself to consider the recommendations. It would appear that the Executive Member for Housing supports the proposals in the report, so we'll take that, and I'll take that as the consultation for the appointment of the officer. It's now for yourself to determine the highways matters.
I've listened to the representations that we've received. Do appreciate the concerns of local residents. And as has been said, the difficult position that we as an authority have to make that balance between the individual rights of all involved in this situation. The proposals that officers have put forward seem to me to be a reasonable response to those conflicting responsibilities that we have as an authority. I appreciate also that what's been referred to, the work through the local plan in resolving the need for more gypsy and traveller sites, which fundamentally, does put us in a difficult position in respect of this situation. So on the basis of the recommendations before me, and having listened to the officers and the representations that have been made, I'm going to approve the recommendations in this report, which include moving forward, as we've discussed, on identifying land ownership and the process for stopping up. Obviously, that would be subject to review as the more information becomes available, but equally the process of identifying suitable accommodation, as has been described, is equally something we need to take forward as quickly as possible, so that twin track approach to resolve the situation, I hope will lead to a speedy resolution of the concerns of local residents, but recognise our responsibilities as a both highways and a housing authority. So on that basis, I'm happy to approve the recommendation. Thank you. So we'll move on now to item 6, which relates to the Copmanthorpe crossing. And I'm going to ask officers to introduce this item, again, taking account of our responsibilities as the relevant authority governing rights of way and our public sector equality duty.
I'll do a very quick introduction. So we, as per previous reports, we understand Network Rail are progressing despite the decision you made approximately a year ago with the current proposal. So we anticipate submission of a Transport and Works Act. Just to be clear, we've not received that yet. As you've heard, both the City Council and Parish Council have lobbied Network Rail on the unsuitability of a stepped bridge, but we can't prejudge what might be in that Transport and Works Act application when it is submitted to us. So we're seeking a delegation in that sense. So I'll hand over to Helen just to add any details.
So indication by Network Rail is that the Transport and Works Act application should be submitted imminently. They've said mid-March. So, and obviously there's a 6 weeks consultation period, which will fall during the pre-election period, which is why we're taking this to you now for a delegation. And we are asking that the indication from Network Rail is that the application will be for stepped access. They have not, what they've indicated is that they have not changed the design of the bridge. And so we're asking for you as executive member to consider whether we should object to the order application and prepare all the documents to that purpose, support the order, or not get involved, neither support nor object, and stay neutral in that case.
Thank you for that contribution. I would say that national legislation makes clear, particularly national organisations with access to more significant resources such as Network Rail have a particular responsibility to make reasonable adjustments and a positive duty and the public sector equality duty to eliminate discriminatory features which impact on individuals with protected characteristics. And that includes wheelchair users, elderly and women. In addition to the equalities concerns, it should be noted, I think it is noted in the report, that a new 160 household development is proposed fairly close to the site of the alternative crossing point, which will increase the number of users wanting to access the countryside or walk or cycle along the route to Bishopthorpe, which, as you heard from one of the speakers, is an old trackway, but also part of the long distance footpath, the Ebor Way. I've also note comments have been submitted from Jamie Wood, who was referred to by the speaker, who has actually demonstrated that wheelchair access is still is possible at present using the current facilities. I believe that whatever powers are available to Network Rail should not negate the opportunity for City of York Council to represent the impact this proposal would have on residents of York and the aspirations for sustainable travel accessible to all. So I'm willing to approve option A, as you've indicated in the report, unless subsequently agreed in consultation with the director that the proposal has been significantly changed to justify one of the other stances. So it's basically just confirming the decision that was made previously, but allowing delegation in the event that there are circumstances changed from what we understand at present.
Yes, I think just to be clear, what we're setting out is a delegation, so that you and I will discuss. But I think what you're indicating is, unless something's changed, your view is option A will be the one chosen.
Just trying to sort of, give a strong steer both to yourselves and Network Rail that our position has not changed from what we took previously. Is that okay? Yep. So then move on to the next item, which is item 7, Respark and low traffic neighbourhoods. I should say I certainly welcome this report as a step towards a more transparent approach to managing the workload of the department. And I do sort of I want to acknowledge the points made by one of the speakers that waiting lists is obviously a fair approach for those who raise petitions, given the limited staff resource, but there is a bit of a danger that we get into too piecemeal sort of process. So I'll just sort of put that.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on that response to public speakers. So we do have a clear process for dealing with requests for Respark. The process is one to respond to petitions or requests, and there is information on the website about how to do that. The process, most of the reports that you receive have a process flow chart within them about how those Respark schemes progress, and that's one of public consultation first with those properties in an informal way, and then that's brought to a public decision session before we progress to a formal traffic regulation order consultation, and that's obviously a process laid out in legislation. So we do have a very sort of tight flowchart process for Respark. I would agree with the speaker that process is not as clearly set out for low traffic neighbourhoods, but that's because they are by their nature slightly more fluid in nature, and the measures which we might use to achieve them are different. But the process of a traffic regulation order would of course be as per the legislation, with consultation and a decision session here. I think nearly all the low traffic neighbourhood schemes would be prepared and presented to yourself before we went to the advert. And indeed, for low traffic neighbourhoods, we've tended to use experimental traffic regulation orders to allow the public to comment and us to change in response to that feedback. So I'll hand over to Darren to talk through the report.
Good morning, Councillor. As James says, the report came about due to a number of petitions that were raised from external sources for low traffic neighbourhoods. At the moment, we don't have a process for taking them forward, so it was decided to combine them with the resident parking schemes to make one work stream to try and get a better flow and actually access some of these requests. Going to the concept, as one of the speakers spoke about, the process isn't fully defined, but it would be that we would look to the options available in each location, because as James indicated, it's not a straight, we could make it, put bollards in, there was different processes and different options for each street, so we'd have to review each street and then go out to the residents and put those proposals forward and see if they're still in favour of it. And so the report was just make council aware that we are looking to have a process in place to actually progress the LTNs. Another speaker also mentioned about the old village at Huntington, and the signs mentioned in that are being put in today, we've been told. So progress is happening. It's just a coincidence.
I promise this is purely coincidental. We've been trying to expedite it, and it just happens to be today. I just also wanted to say just briefly on low traffic neighbourhoods, some of them are quite complex, and having this this sort of flow process will allow us to pick out which are the more complex ones that we would have to treat as a wider project, but we would be able to make that diagnosis through this.
Well, I think this is very welcome, just to, as I said, give some transparency to demonstrate the level of work that is on the books and the reasons why it takes so long to get through the process. As you know, as frustrated as any other ward councillors when it comes to trying to progress schemes that residents are asking for. But I would say that I think one comment I did want to make was that having a transport strategy, we've now got a draft transport strategy, which over the next few months will be subject to widespread discussion. Depending on how that goes, it's quite possible there may be other people who will come out wanting that some issues addressed within their own neighbourhoods, but it should allow us to make more strategically prioritised decisions that support the transport hierarchy and boost active and sustainable travel options. So I do acknowledge the length of time that Respark process is taken, and I think it does hopefully indicate to the general public the challenges that we have trying to progress these schemes, given the legal process as well as the sort of more informal consultation that we adopt in York.
Just to add, Chair, just for clarity, I know it was mentioned at our last session, but the weight limits request for Elvington and the bridge issues there, I think we mentioned last time that was in our work programmes, and as you can see from the recommendations, it's actually number 2 on the list in terms of where we're at in terms of work programmes, and I know officers have actually started some work on that already.
And again, in the interest of transparency, the first one on the list does happen to be in my ward, but it has been there for the last 2 years at least, if not longer. So, you know, they all work through the process. And if there is urgent issues like, as you say, the old village, so we will try and address those, even if a short-term measure is sort of more expedient than looking at a bigger scheme longer term. Darren.
Just also to reference the written representation from Councillor Myers about North Parade, Queen Anne's Road. It was submitted by a resident as a potential suggestion. It will be added to the work stream, but it didn't come in as any formal petition or anything. It was just a representation due to issues around the school access times.
All right. So I mean, just to clarify, that is something which was sent in as a written submission, wasn't it?
A written submission from a resident, yeah, which Councillor Myers forwarded on.
Right.
But we haven't had any chance to engage with the wider neighbourhood to see if it's something the residents would be in favour of.
So it is something that we can look at, but the normal process would be all councillors or local residents, petition. You know, have a petition. Yeah. So we've got some sense of level of demand from local residents to address a particular issue. So again, I think, as I said, it is really one of trying to strike that balance between dealing with the most urgent priorities if there are accident statistics or changes in the road environment that demonstrate that as an authority we have to respond to that, then we can do that. But the normal sort of process of petitions and representations from all councillors, we try and take that on a fair basis. That's sequenced through as our staffing resources allow us to do. So
no, I don't think so. Just for you to accept the recommendation.
On that basis, I'm happy to accept the recommendation, which is noting with the additions that have been mentioned to that. Okay. I move on then to item 8, which is the micromobility trial update, and I believe we've got someone from TIER present, haven't we?
Chair, just briefly introduce this item. We originally entered into the Dft Micromobility trial at the end of 2020. We've obviously now been running a successful trial for 2.5 years now, and we felt it was a good time to come back and talk about some of the outcomes, etc. Just to introduce Alex Eburn is our project manager, and Jess Hall is representing from TIER.
Thank you very much. Just make a brief comment to introduce this item, and as you said, despite the sort of stop-start government decisions about the process of extending e-scooter availability within this country, I think that I should put on record our thanks to TIER that have demonstrated a fantastic commitment to working in partnership with the council, the university, the hospital, and rolling out the scheme in a carefully managed way, learning from the experience and adapting to providing an exemplary service. The gradual extension has allowed careful research as to locations, preferred routes, slow zones, and so forth, And I do think there is still massive potential for greater uptake in the outer areas with spin-offs for e-bike use and ownership of e-bikes as people experience the benefits of different forms of travel. And also note from your report that 25% of riders having a monthly subscription is a clear indication that this option's here to stay as an alternative to other modes of travel.
Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. I think most people know me now, but my name is Jess. I'm head of public policy at TIR and I live and work in York. I joined TIR in October 2020 and I launched the first e-scooter on the streets of York, and I've led the expansion and the management of the service ever since. TIR is the world's largest micromobility provider, but York was TIR's first UK city. And since launching in York, TIR has expanded all across the UK. We now work with 26 local authorities, but York remains the jewel in the crown, and we're incredibly proud to operate here. In October 2020, we launched our service on the university campus. We launched with 10 scooters and slowly grew the fleet to 50 vehicles to ensure the service was embedded and the issues were ironed out before we increased the fleet across the city. This responsible approach meant that we've since expanded to cover most areas within the outer ring road, as well as Haxby. We have a dense network of parking bays in the city with particularly good vehicle availability in the city centre, around Hull Road, South Bank and Clifton. And our plans for 2023 include expanding our parking network to improve vehicle availability in underserved areas such as Acomb and Huntington. We currently have 500 e-scooters in York and have plans to almost double this number in 2023. As well as our e-scooter service, we work closely with City of York Council to add e-bikes to our service in 2021. At present, we have 200 e-bikes with plans to double that number this year as well. Over the last 2.5 years, TIR in York has employed 30 full and part-time team members. And we currently have 12 full-time members of staff supporting our York operations. We're proud to be a living wage employer and do not offer 0-hour contracts or gig work. Demand for our services increased from May to October, and we've already begun our recruitment drive to prepare for this increase in demand. It's been great to play a role in the success of a shared micromobility scheme in York, but none of this would have been possible without the proactive engagement from the council and also a wide range of stakeholders in the city. York Hospital and York University and York St John University have been critical to the success of the service, and I'd like to thank both of these organisations for their continued collaboration. North Yorkshire Police have also been a great partner since we launched. In York, we have trained the police teams on shared e-scooter schemes and have also developed a really smooth reporting process to make sure that the police are well equipped to manage instances of poor rider behaviour. I'd also like to thank the wider stakeholder group who I meet monthly for their support. York Sight Loss Council are a key member, and they've been pivotal in shaping the scheme design in York. A great example of this, TIR e-scooters in York were the first to include black and yellow licence plates. The ID plates were designed by TIR in conjunction with the Sight Loss Council, and these have been rolled out across the rest of the UK. And a final note, it's been great to see a progressive increase in ridership numbers in York. At its peak in 2022, we had in excess of 7,000 customers using the service every week, and we're excited to share the new ridership numbers when we peak in 2023.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent report. Alex, do you want to add to that?
I think the one thing I'd just like to touch on in the report, and it's clearly stated in the recommendations, is just that we're about to approach our final year of the trial, but we still haven't got any details in terms of the proposed transport bill. What that's was announced in, I think, February of 2022 as part of the Queen's speech. And that is proposed to provide further details on how schemes operated by local authorities may operate in the future. Also some information about potential legislation changes around private e-scooter usage. So at the moment, unfortunately, with this update, we don't have any details in terms of what that's going to entail. So one of the recommendations that I put in the report is just to bring back another report when we do have some of those details, so we can start to plan ahead for the remainder of the trial.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm conscious, obviously, we plan to have this update acknowledging the annual report that you gave to the stakeholder group that demonstrated, the benefits of the scheme and how it's progressing. But we were hoping that by now we would have that guidance from the government and a clear pathway forward. But certainly, I think we've demonstrated that with each extension of the arrangement, we have seen it as a benefit to the city, something we want to continue. And once we've got some clarity from the government about how this is going to take forward, I would certainly be very supportive of us continuing with this arrangement. Obviously, we don't know as yet whether the government will sort of want to liberalise it, to extend it to bring in other providers, or whether it would still be a single provider. But certainly our experience has been, partly through circumstances with COVID, we have been able to sort of grow things gradually, rather than have the negative experiences, or particularly negative experiences of some other cities, with the concerns, as you mentioned, about Sight Loss Council, but obviously other people with disabilities, if they're left scattered about, then it is a serious concern for anybody with mobility issues or sight loss, as to where they're going to suddenly find unexpected obstructions on the footpath. So I think in that particular respect, TIA have been very helpful and proactive in trying to ensure that users take responsibility for how they leave the scooters. We do have one or two changes that have led to a few more complaints about that in recent months, but I think on balance, TIA have got a handle on that, and trying to make sure that when we identify locations where they're being left in inappropriate position, we can tackle that and prevent that from happening longer term. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that particular aspect.
Yeah, just on the parking, I think the model and approach. This is your answer to say what they That's a rookie error. The parking model that City of York Council adopted is to have mandatory parking zones, and we think that approach has led to strong parking compliance. So we'll maintain that because it's working well.
Okay. So on that basis, I'm happy to note the recommendations. I look forward to a future report as and when we have an indication from government about how this will be taken forward beyond May 24, which is the current, since you're checking his papers. So thank you very much for your contributions on that. So I'll move on now to the next item, item 9, which is the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. And I should say that when I first raised the question as to why York didn't have a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan in 2019, I didn't expect it would take us quite so long, but we are here now, and I'm very pleased that we're well on the way to concluding a formally adopted policy document that will enable us to secure Active Travel Fund England funding and achieve the quality network which is envisaged in publications like Gear Change, which has the specific objective of 50% of local trips being made by walking and cycling by 2030. That's a tall ask, but it's also in line with our carbon reduction and climate change policy, which was adopted last November.
I'll hand over to Andy in just a second, but this is an update report on progress. One of the public speakers referenced an update on active travel, and this is, as you referenced briefly, on your agenda for your decision session next week, and those papers were published yesterday if people want to see what that update on the active travel programme says. I'd also just like to clarify the comment made by Councillor Melly about Active Travel England. For clarity, the council was asked to do a self-assessment, which we obviously did. Active Travel England assessed our submission and scored us at the band below the one we had for self-assessment. That puts us on the same score as over half the councils in the country, and the score awarded by Active Travel England hasn't actually changed, so they haven't downgraded us, they just didn't agree with our self-assessment. I'll hand over to Andy to update. James?
Yeah, basically the main gist of the report is just to give you an update as to exactly what stage we're at in the LC whip. Each LC whip goes through several phases. There's the evidence gathering phase at the beginning and scoping. There's then the network identification stages, separate stages for cycling and walking networks. And then we go through the sort of prioritization phase, which is where we identify the most strategic schemes that we can then do further work on, and then get better costings to then enable us to submit bids for future funding to either the Department for Transport or Active Travel England. So we've gone through the first 4 phases now. So we've done the data gathering, we've done the network identification. We had a stakeholder event last month with various groups of stakeholders. I got quite a lot of feedback from them on what they thought of the network that we'd identified for walking and cycling, and those comments will have sort of influenced the final network that Sister have come up with. We have now gone through a sort of semi-prioritization process where we've identified a list of top 10 list of cycle links that we've Sister have been sent away to do some further sort of high level concept designs on, and 4 core walking zones. I mean those walking zones came from some of the evidence gathering that they'd done, and also from the steering group and some of the working group comments that we got back, and they are to try and address specific issues on bits of the walking network where we've got significant barriers that are caused by things like the inner ring road, things like guard railing, lack of crossings and things like that, the route between the station and the city centre. And so we will be doing a further round of consultation in tandem with the local transport strategy consultation straight after the local elections in May, and that will be the opportunity for members of the public, for councillors, parish councils to sort of feed back on the high level concept design stuff that Sister have come up with. Originally, we were proposing to try and get that phase in before the local elections, but it was all getting a bit too sort of constrained, and also it makes more sense to do it in tandem with the local transport strategy consultation anyway. So
in particular, to answer that point about it being rushed, we're not rushing it. We've got, this is a progress report to demonstrate that we've completed a fairly significant stage of the research and the evidence gathering, but we are now reaching the point where there will be further consultation and steering group meetings and so forth after the election, as I understand it. But the consultants presumably have got plenty to be going on with whilst they're out of the public eye during the election period. Is that, have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, this gives them more sort of wriggle room now that they've got longer period over which to do that concept design work. So in theory, that it should give us a better end product, really, because they've got more time to get out and about and assess what the issues are and identify solutions to those. And just to come back to one of the comments that Councillor Doughty mentioned, yeah, I am aware of that feasibility study. It wasn't Sustrans that actually did it, it was council officers, but I will let Sister know that does exist. I mean, it was done at a stage before the current infrastructure guidance, so it will be slightly out of date in terms of the quality of infrastructure that we will be expecting, but I will let them know that it does exist.
Yes, so I think I would say that this is obviously very welcome evidence base. As has been said, one of the comments which was made in the response to the self-assessment scoring was that we didn't have a fully adopted LC whip. So obviously that, we can certainly fulfill that in the coming months with this work here. And I think it gives us the evidence base for schemes that have the biggest impact, both from the point of view of mode shift, health, tackling deprivation, connections to education and employment, and responding to the proposed new housing developments in the local plan. It gives the opportunity for us to change travel behaviour as people move into new settings with new trips to education, work and leisure. And contrary to the suggestion we're engaged in a war on the motorist, it is much more about providing that opportunity for independent travel. Young people, old people don't have access to a car very often, and they want that independence to be able to travel for their daily visits to school, shops and so forth. And I would also put on record that York has Andy Vose knows full well, a long track record of developing cycling strategy and cycle routes. But I think this is the first serious attempt to focus on core walking zones and walking as a mode of transport, which is very important for local trips, particularly focusing on networks that cross current barriers such as the inner ring road, and making sure that they're as accessible as possible. So new crossings and greater pedestrian priority at such access points across the inner ring road, I think, could make a big difference. And just as an example, the impact of reduced traffic on Coppergate is already being seen through both from visitor comments and from businesses finding pedestrians are more likely to visit their premises with less traffic on that road. And likewise, I think that the Castle Gateway programme in its full fruition could offer similar benefits to Tower Street and the connections between the city centre and the Riverside area by King's Stave. We've reduced traffic on those corridors, could be of major benefit both economically and from a safety and attractiveness point of view, making those walking and cycling connections more obvious and attractive. So I'm happy to note the progress that's been made on these, and as is referred to in here, there is a stakeholder group, a steering group, very much welcome further involvement as the scheme progresses, so that we can make sure that it does reflect the aspirations of our wider residents.
Yeah, one point that I'd also make is that this is a living document. So once we've got the final LC whip and it's adopted, it will get reviewed on a regular basis. So any schemes that don't make it onto that priority list aren't necessarily dead in the water. We will review the list on probably a biannual sort of basis. So it's. I know we've had quite a lot of comments back from various parish councils saying, well, why is this particular route not on that map? So it will be something that probably once we do the reviews, there will be extra routes added, and once we start working through the priority list, other schemes will sort of make their way up to the top. So
yes, I think that's obviously as you say, the information which is in this document is the evidence that we have available to us at the moment, and that can change both with new major developments, but also changing travel patterns, whether it's because of people working from home or new shops or offices opening in different places. That is all going to change over time. So this gives us a framework for us to assess what the priorities are at any given point in time. And as you say, it would be something which we would, once we've adopted it, would then be reviewed in the light of our transport strategy and our local plan developments. So I very much welcome the report and all the work that's gone into getting us this far. I note in Appendix B in here, there is a list of proposed, as you said, proposed priority cycle links and core walking zones, but those are literally the start of that process and subject to further conversations and discussion. But as we'll discuss next week, I don't want to sort of put all development on ice. We've got funding that we can spend and capacity if we've got designs that we can progress on to do that alongside developing this. So it's not an either or. We need to move forward with what we can and to improve active travel provision within the city as quickly as possible. At that point, I think that concludes the items. I don't have any urgent business, so I'll conclude the meeting and thank you for your time, and we'll return again next week for second part 2. Thank you.